Greetings and welcome to the second in our series of conversations with leaders in real estate about how our industry can combat systemic racism and social injustice through our concrete actions. I'm going to introduce our featured speaker in just a moment, but first I want to say a few things about what we're going through and why these kind of discussions are so important right now. We've heard powerful emotional rhetoric from all quarters. And it's reassuring that so many people from so many walks of life have been affected by the latest manifestations of racism and social injustice. But if we're going to capitalize on this latest spate of unfortunate killings as a catalyst to finally make meaningful change, we're going to have to move way past rhetoric. And now is the time for all of us to act. And our industry needs to know what we can do to effect change and where. And to help us with this challenge, I'm delighted to introduce Tammy Jones, the co-founder and CEO of the Basis Investment Group, which is a multi-strategy commercial real estate investment platform she founded in 2009 with JEMB Realty Corporation. Tammy has 20 years of experience in commercial real estate, having previously worked in multifamily at CW Capital, where she and Michael Berman created CW's capital markets platform. And she also worked at what was then known as GMAC Commercial Mortgage, which we now know today as Berkadia. Tammy's had extensive experience in the capital markets, and at Basis alone, she's closed nearly $4 billion in debt and structured equity investments across the country. And among her extensive volunteer experiences, she sits on the board of New York Stock Exchange company Mack-Cali Realty Corporation and serves as the current chair of the Real Estate Executive Council, and we will come back to that in our conversation. So, Tammy, let's get going. This has got to be the most incredible period for someone of color to experience, given the ravages of the pandemic, which disproportionately has affected African Americans, and the senseless killings that never seem to stop. And let me start with, how are you feeling?
So, well, first of all, thank you, Doug, for inviting me to lend my voice to what is a critical issue. And thank you to NMHC for hosting these webinar series so that way we can raise the level of consciousness. So I'm just going to start as an African-American mother, because I only know how to be just vulnerable. And in hearing about the murder of George Floyd and seeing it, it just shook me to my core, because I have a son. And I think that America just really was shaken by witnessing that, that tragic event. And for African Americans, it's like the trifecta. I mean, not only has COVID disproportionately affected us in healthcare, and not only has the economic shutdown affected us disproportionately with unemployment, but we also had our human rights brutally violated. And, you know, I've gone through stages, Doug. I've gone through the stages of anger. I've felt, overwhelmed. I've felt grief. And I guess lastly, I began to feel some hope. Let's just talk a little bit about, some of the other things that have occurred that tell us as leaders that this problem is structural, it's systemic, and it's been here and around for a very long time. I mean, there are disparities in our criminal justice system, not just police brutality. There are disparities in education. We're talking about housing. There's housing discrimination. There's an affordability crisis in housing that affects African Americans in our communities in a very, very dire way. There is corporate inequity that is rearing its ugly head. And I could go on and on, but I think the moment now and where I think we're all experiencing is that there has been a light that has been shined on this. And for me, I feel like for the first time in my career, and I've been doing this for 20 years, like I don't have to explain the burden of why I can't just pull myself up by my bootstraps, or my brother or sister can, because these are real problems that are deeply rooted that I believe, will have solutions, and we're going to talk about them. But it feels for the first time that there's a bit of a shift and I've said this to a few people, because as you mentioned in your opening remarks, there has been an outpouring of support and outreach, and from CEOs and to me personally, asking if I'm okay. And I love those statements, but it's not enough. We actually have to take real action, and it needs to be action that creates systemic change.
And I think we have a diversity and inclusion committee of volunteers, who help us, guide us in our thinking. We had a conversation with them a couple of weeks ago, and it was the first time that the African American man on the call, it was raw. It was very, very honest, and I think it was a time when they decided, I'm not going to pull punches anymore.
That's right.
If I make white people uncomfortable, I'm going to make white people uncomfortable, and I think this could be different, and I really hope so. I'm a lot older than you are, but I've been through a lot of these, we thought change was coming, and meaningful change never came.
And
so
I want to add 2 more points to what you just said. So number one, I agree. There has been, I have witnessed, I've been on calls and panels and Zoom meetings, really trying to just be a leader in this space, to let folks know that it's okay to talk about this. And I've been really encouraged by the fact that it's white America that's listening. It's the corporate CEOs, it's the leaders of trade organizations. And that is helpful, because that's the shift that I was talking about. But I think there are some basic things in multifamily and in commercial real estate that are huge, huge opportunities. I'm going to tell you what I mean.
I am looking forward to that. That's what I want to talk about, because I think it's important for us to talk about outcomes and, and metrics and accountability and things like that, that we really got to put the pieces together. And that's that's the beauty of talking to you today. And maybe we can start, either way, either through your company and what you're doing there, or with Reese. I'd like to start with Reese, if that's okay with you. You
Sure.
are the chair of Reese. People who watch this may not know what Reese is, so could you give us the elevator speech on what it is, what do you do, who's in the membership, and so on?
Absolutely. So, but before I do that, and if you don't mind, I hope that this is a free-flowing conversation.
Yes, this is free form.
I want to just talk about one important opportunity, because now we're switching to opportunities, and I will tell you a lot about Reese in the real estate community and the multifamily community. That is really interesting. So when you think, I mentioned the wealth gap, and I just have to go back to that because it's so important. The latest Federal Reserve reports state that the average net worth of a white family is about $171,000. And the average net worth of a black family is about 10 times less, at $17,000. And we talked about, all of the systemic issues, and we talked about this being a problem. And it dates back to redlining and the GI Bill, and we don't have time to talk about that. But the interesting thing is that the difference in the net worth of those 2 families is primarily real estate. And what's so amazing about our industry, Doug, is that we are in a wealth creation or wealth creating industry, and we have a huge opportunity to help affect this change. And so that's something that I think is super exciting, because if we don't do anything, it's going to take us hundreds of years to catch up and close that wealth gap. And so I feel really blessed to be in the commercial real estate industry, because I feel like there are ways to create wealth. It's not just about creating jobs, but it's about creating wealth and doing, having a multifaceted approach that will make change. And so now let me talk to you about Reese. So Real Estate Executive Council is the preeminent professional trade organization for senior executives that are African American and are also in commercial real estate. And it's been in existence for more than 15 years. Our mission is really to advance opportunities and the careers of African Americans in commercial real estate. And we have a few initiatives that we've been working on for years, but I think our work is even more critical and more important today. And so when I think about Reese, and so I'm the first female chair, so I'm very excited about that. And obviously, no chair can do it alone. And I have a an amazing board that includes, some of, the most prominent real estate executives. I know you know Ken McIntyre, who's our CEO now. Ken Bacon is on our emeritus board. Darryl Carter is a member. I mean, and I can go on and on. Stephanie Williams, who, is, just an outstanding, woman in property management and multifamily, is on our board. And so I'm surrounded by all these amazing minds. And so we have been focusing on what I'll try to just break it down into 5 key areas, because I can't remember more than 5, right? So the first thing that we're trying to do is to focus on building a diversity ecosystem. And I'm going to tell you what that means. And that is from early stage high school pipeline, through middle management, through senior management, up through boards and entrepreneurship. That's what we call our multifaceted approach. And so, you have to take an approach to figuring out how do you build your diversity ecosystem, because it just doesn't happen. And one of the things that I'll say about our industry is that, and I've been in this industry for, as I mentioned, about 2 decades, and I've watched us really make attempts, because I think that our hearts are in the right places. I mean, I believe that there are really effective and good diversity committees, but I don't know that we're coming together, right? And I feel like our approaches have been a little bit disparate. And so I kind of think about, as a CEO and as a leader, and I think we can all relate to, if we had a new business to launch or a new initiative, what's the first thing that we would do? Well, we would put together a diversity business plan, like any initiative. And so I want to give you an example. Say we were going to launch a multifamily strategy, value add, and we were going to be in the middle market. And I said to you, Doug, I'm going to go and I'm going to just look at some properties, in Baltimore. And then you said there were no real performance metrics. There were no IRR targets. There wasn't even an average size of the investment, and there weren't really any performance metrics. And then I also said, well, there's no one really, assigned to this initiative. There's not really a team, and there's not accountability. And by the way, no one's compensation is tied to this. What do you think would happen? We would not succeed. And so I challenge all of my leaders and my friends and my fellow CEOs to just think about that. Stop there and think about that. And so Reese is looking to launch this diversity ecosystem, but also to work with firms and other trade organizations to work on a diversity business plan that has 3 things, 3 really basic things that we can all relate to, because I want us to speak the same language. Concrete strategy. And your strategies, I'm going to go over them in a moment in the diversity ecosystem. And number 2 would be performance metrics. What's your baseline? Where are you trying to go with respect to, hiring of African Americans, by way of one example, and we'll talk about several. And finally, number 3, accountability and having compensation tied to your success. It's just like any business initiative. And then having people, a team that's accountable. And this team has to start all the way at the top. It cannot start at the bottom. And with all due respect, I love chief diversity officers. I think it's a step in the right direction. But chief diversity officers who do not have the connectivity to the culture and don't have the power of the senior leadership team or the support of the board, they just will not succeed. And so I believe that, and I've watched it, I believe that we've been poking at this diversity thing. I think that many of us think that you're supposed to just go early stage. And so at Reese, as I mentioned, we believe you have to have a multifaceted approach, and you have to do all of the above. And we also believe that we can't do it alone. We need NMHC, we need other trade organizations. And so one initiative that we launched 4 years ago is our program called Real Estate Exchange. And Real Estate Exchange is an early stage pipeline. It's a high school summer program that provides diverse African American and Latino youth, many of whom are disadvantaged, economically disadvantaged kids like I was. I mean, I grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Southeast Queens. And so I can see myself in those children. And we have partners with Cornell and MIT and University of Miami, and we basically expose them to commercial real estate. And I am so proud of our organization because we did not let COVID stop us. We refused. We pivoted to online, and so the program will go on. And at the end of this summer, we will have exposed 400 high school kids of color to commercial real estate. And it doesn't just stop there. That's where Reese is owning this pipeline to walk them through each of the stages. And so Priya, I have to give a shout out to Priya because they were our largest sponsor, and it's important to recognize them. And we want this program to grow. Our goal is to have 1,500 kids at the end of 5 years. So I said 5 things. So the first thing is diversity business plan. You need to have one. You need to make sure that it's just like any business initiative and it has all the things I said. Number 2 is a diversity ecosystem. And that has to have strategies that are going all the way up into the boardroom. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Number 3, you need to have a strategy for spending with African American firms. Who are your vendors? Who are your lawyers? Who are your brokers? Who are your appraisers? Who are your underwriters? Make sure that you are focused on being inclusive in who your vendors are. That's so important. And so that can be on your diversity business plans. I just gave a couple of strategies. Support a high school program, look at your leadership team, make sure that you have a goal, a hiring goal for that. Look at your board, pull up your website. And if you don't see any faces of color, any Black faces, then make that one of your strategies. It's really straightforward. And then we can work together to figure out as sister organizations, brother sister organizations, how to create this pipeline and funnel this pipeline, because Reese really has access to this pipeline. So number 4, and this is a big one, it has to do with the wealth gap. It's access to capital and credit. We talked about credit being the difference between, a white family's net worth and a Black family. Well, what do you think about a Black entrepreneur? Sometimes we don't have the relationships, the lending relationships. We don't have the access to the, larger GPs that, or LPs, or even co-GPs if we wanted to do a multifamily deal. And let's remember, multifamily is such a welcoming asset class. It's the one that most people start with. And many of us as African Americans will start in affordable housing. And it's really hard to make money in affordable housing, and it's really hard to scale. You can do it, you get your tax credits, and the hope is that, you'll be able to do one project and the next project, and it just takes so much longer. So I think that NMHC could have a huge opportunity to figure out how we can develop some access to capital programs, maybe mentorships and sponsorships with larger multifamily firms, with smaller African American firms. It's not just about mentoring employees, because at Reese we have different types of members. We have vendors, which is why I'm including spend. We have folks that are in the commercial real estate firms and corporations and public firms. And then we have entrepreneurs. And so I always feel like we talk a lot about hiring, but we need to also talk about access to capital and credit. And so, helping people with banking relationships, it's super important because you don't want there to be redlining. And I can tell you that it's been more difficult for folks to get lines. And these are qualified people. And again, when I speak to my banking friends, I say, listen, we're not asking you to relax your criteria. These are qualified owners and operators that just may not know a senior person to get their line pushed through, or may not know another larger firm that they can say, hey, can we do this deal together? And I think that there are so many opportunities, and I want us to think more broadly about that. And finally, number 5 is partnership. Partnership, because this problem is too big to do it alone. It's too big for Reese to do it alone. And we value partners like NMHC because we know that you can help this scale. You can help all these initiatives scale. If we come together, because I think that what we've all tried to do is we knew and recognized that there was a problem, but we tried to all solve it in different ways. And so I'm asking for folks to come together. I'm asking for folks to realize that that's the opportunity in partnership.
Yeah, and I think just a couple of comments. I mean, that's exactly what we should be thinking about. The Reese leadership team can be a phenomenal networking source. I just got off the phone last week with a internationally known publicly traded company, and they were saying, we just can't find those people. You've heard it as many times. You can't, because we did it Fannie Mae, where we created a rainbow coalition of the senior management team. I hired, I helped recruit Ken Bacon, among others there. And when you do that, you create an incredible networking source for yourself, because the people that you put in those positions, in senior positions, help you source talent. And the other thing that we did at Fannie, which you pointed to, is really, really important, is to say we're going to have a goal in mind. We said 20% of our discretionary dollars would go to minority firms across the board, not for janitorial services, and that's how Daryl Carter and Quentin Primo got started, was an affirmative action to say we're going to look for minority firms to be part of our DUS program in the multifamily space. And that really got Daryl and Quentin Primo started. And so we also did that across the board, though, in all the relationships. And you've mentioned in previous discussions that you've had in this field that people need a toehold. They need to get that start. They need to get that chance. It's really, really important.
And I have to give a shout out to Freddie Mac, because I am, I think, the only African-American female seller servicer in the SBL program. I'm small. I'm looking for firms that realize that it's harder for us to start, just like Quentin and Daryl had to have their trajectory. But I am so excited about the opportunity. And I'll say one thing. When I look, it's 2020, Doug, and we don't have a single firm that's diversified, that's African-American in real estate, that's like a KKR or a Brookfield. We don't have a single firm, or a BlackRock, and we don't have, a Walker and Dunlap. And I look at Willie's firm. I saw his webinar today, and I'm just amazed at the success, and I aspire. I'm inspired by it, and I aspire to that. And so I think that even within larger firms, realizing that there's a big enough world out there for all of us, make sure that you're adopting, mentoring, accepting, supporting other firms of color. And I'm not necessarily saying this as a commercial for me. I'm saying this for firms throughout in the multifamily space. I'm proud to say that although we're small at Basis Multifamily, 30% of our borrowers are women and minorities, and we're tracking it, and we're excited about it, because I'll tell you what happens. Study after study proves that two things. One, diverse teams produce better outcomes. And I think we see that, we know that. We don't, even though I don't think that corporate America embraces that, it's the truth, right? There's data to support, empirical data to support that. Number two, if you focus on African Americans, if we are given an opportunity and access, we will hire each other, we will invest together, and we will invest in our communities. And because we know these communities, and we may be able to understand and find opportunity in those communities because we've lived in those communities. And what's really interesting is there's a multiplier effect. I look at I have invested and loaned about $850 million with other women and minority owned companies. And I've created thousands of jobs, and I'm tracking that. So we're going to talk a little bit about what I do at Basis, but that's an example of being intentional about it, and also trying to make sure that you discuss and highlight the multiplier effect that we've all learned. Again, really basic business principles. And I was an econ major at Cornell. It's there, it's true. And so it's beyond, it's kind of the multiplier effect, like what you said with Ken Bacon and the network, but it's also in investing in our communities. And again, we have an affordability crisis in America. I'm very bullish on workforce housing, both with my seller servicer license and my fund. I have a commingled fund. I'm a registered investment advisor, and I manage capital for some of the largest pension funds in the United States and sovereigns. And I'm looking at that space. And so, I'm open to partnerships, and I know all of the REIS members who are, operating in the space are open to partnerships. And I want to highlight that in addition to partnering with trade organizations, there are really significant partnerships for companies to come together who are trying to figure out, how do we make our atmosphere and our culture more inclusive.
I'm going to introduce you to this company that I talked to. I told them I was.
Awesome.
One of the things, staying on REIS just for a second, your internship program is very impressive. We have been supporting your friend Jeff Hayward's initiative with the Future Housing Internships partnership with the Urban League, and I'm trying to grow that. But I think at the same time, I'd like to help you. So I'll tell you on this this conversation, anything we can do. So anything we can do to help with placing talented people, we will do. So let me know how I can help in that.
No, I appreciate that. And again, I think it highlights how powerful partnership is and how important it is.
Oh,
and
yeah, no,
that's the solution.
There's no question. One of the things I wanted to switch to basis for a second is you mentioned, going out and building a business, and without the networks that the white community has at its disposal, the country clubs and all the networks and so on that are out there. I remember Daryl telling me that when he first formed Avaneth and when it started going out to source capital, he had to get used to, he had to toughen his, get the alligator skin out. I mean, he was told no so many times. And how was it for you? How did you build your networks? And what lesson will that give others as in terms of your sort of mentoring the future leaders in the African American community who are coming up? What do they need to know about in sort of that quest, I guess?
So my story with Basis is one of a lot of definitely trial and error. And as Daryl said, who is my big brother, Daryl has been super supportive. Has also been a story of being able to take rejection and keep on coming back. And I'll tell you, throughout my career, I worked at many large institutions, and there's no one that can say that they were able to create their career's success on their own. I obviously had angels. I mentioned Michael Berman. I have to give a shout out to Michael Berman, who has been super important to me as a guide. He was my CEO. I reported to him. I learned from him. And so I think from my perspective, I always knew that I had that entrepreneurship kind of feeling in my belly, that I was going to have to do something on my own. But the advice I give other African American folks that are looking to either become entrepreneurs or even stay in the corporate world is that you have to make sure that you're learning and finding sponsors and mentors, which trained me once I left the safety of corporate America to be able to take rejection. Because I have to tell you, there were so many people that I asked for help, and there were so many people that were not available. And because I was always taught that I had to be better, stronger, faster, have more education, I just had to outwork everybody. And I didn't care if I was working till 5 in the morning. I was going to outwork everybody, because that's what we're taught in the African American community. The education is the way, work hard work is the way. And even with that, there were a lot of hurdles along the way. And so when I decided to form Basis, it was in the great financial crisis, because I watched people make money and ride the wave of recovery up. And I knew that I had to just get out of my own way. And I was working with Michael Berman, and Michael actually, thought I was a little crazy to go out in the GFC, but supported me anyway. And I literally made a list of my top 10 family offices that I did business with that I knew were well capitalized. I got to number 7, got a lot of rejection. And then I finally had struck a partnership with JMB Realty. And that was 11 years ago. We've closed $4 billion. And it's been great. Now, my single most difficult challenge, and Daryl and I have talked about this, has been access to capital and trying to figure out how to go from, scaling and leveraging the capital of my family office to creating what Basis has today, which are 16 investors, public pension plans, sovereigns. And that took a very long time. I would argue that my trajectory took a much longer time than maybe some of my white counterparts. So I think, my advice is to know that being an entrepreneur is not for the faint of heart. You have to be able to be a person of conviction. You have to be able to stay ahead of the curve. You have to make sure that your track record is impeccable. And all those are the lessons that I've learned. And build your track record if you're going to go out. while you're in corporations because you're learning so much. And so, at Basis, it's been great. I mean, it's been, I feel like I'm always working as an entrepreneur, as I'm sure you can imagine. But I feel like my hope is that if I can do this, I can be the change that I want others to see.
That's terrific. How do, I've been trying to encourage the industry. I can't, as a trade association and as a trade association executive, I can't make people do anything. I can only I can point the way. So what should I be doing to talk to my members about how they can make significant progress? They're asking me, how can I make progress toward creating a more inclusive environment for people of color and firms like yours? What advice would you give me?
So I think that the conversation has to start at the top. I mean, I honestly believe that the CEO forums that I've attended, Doug, I'll just be really real with you. Sometimes I'm the only Black person in the room. And that's difficult, right? Because you're not going to get to the core of these issues. And now, while we're being raw and we're being honest and we're being, collaborative, I would suggest that we have some CEO forums with some senior leaders in the African American real estate community, with some senior leaders that are member companies, and we just have a forum to really talk about the issues. We can talk about our diversity plan, the 5 things we talked about. We can offer our support, and it really is about, if you're serious about it, then you're going to do the work. But let's not try to figure out 15 different approaches to it. Or, writing checks is important. That's another part of it. We need capital for sure. But we also need action, and honestly, the problem is here, and it's deeply rooted. But the solution lies in the member companies. It lies in the CEOs and the boards. And so if we can, Reese can facilitate that dialogue in a respectful way, in a way that just is helpful, in a way that says, here's what we're experiencing. And by the way, with the member companies, we can provide mentorship to firms who don't have a lot of African American, even middle management. And what I always say to folks, because I get a lot of these calls, is listen, before you go out and try to get pipeline, let me ask you about your current internal pipeline right now. Do the African Americans that work for you, do they have sponsors? Do you know why they haven't been promoted? Are they in the wrong areas? Let's do a critique in a real, in a healthy way. And I know that everybody thinks that they should rush out to, the HBCUs, which I'm a big believer in also, that we recruit from all over the place in our diversity ecosystem. But if you just do that and you don't care about, what the nurturing, if you will, of those employees, I was that person. I felt it. I always say, if you can't be it if you can't see it, and people lose hope, and that happens. And so this industry still has 78% of the jobs that are white men. And guess how many are African American men? 1.6 per the NAIOP study, 1.6%. And African American women, we don't even register. The statistic is so low. So that's what we're talking about, right? Now let's talk about how we help each other. And so Reese, we can mentor. I'm mentoring employees from majority firms all the time, and the leadership teams don't even know it. I'm saying, and so are my Reese members. We're saying, no, listen, this is the way you navigate that situation. So we can be diversity partners, and we can be the ones that say, listen, your firm has partnered with Reese because they care about you and they know that they have work to do. And it's a great message, and it really, and it's what we believe in, because we don't want the pipeline to suffer. I can tell you that today I'm terrified. When I look in front of me, I don't see too many African American firms that are scalable. And when I look behind me, Doug, I don't see a robust pipeline. And so the work is a lot of work to do, but I tend to be cautiously optimistic that this is not, as we've been saying, not just a moment, but a movement.
Well, I told a couple of comments about that. I told Ken McIntyre that there's the program that 32 of us in the real estate trade association world have built called Careers Building Communities. And it's a website that is designed to reach high school kids, college kids, even people in career transitions, and there, as we know, millions of them out there right now. But we're going to try to really tailor it more to reach into the underserved communities, to the Black schools, and so that is one way to instill interest in this field of real estate. Is so fascinating, and there should be more people of color. It's so interesting, and as you mentioned, it's the way to build wealth. So, and then we are going to partner with Reese. We're going to use you as much as we possibly can. I'm so delighted that we have reached the point where we can really work together. I tried to do it one time before when we were running Project REAP, and it just for whatever reason didn't work out. But I look forward to working with you, and I think we are. Thank you so much. And I think we're going to keep our focus on outcomes.
Yes.
As you mentioned them, and I will follow up when we push out this conversation. I will follow up with your 5 steps because I think it's important for people to see that. And then we will just keep this conversation going. The next people I'm hoping to talk to are Jeff Hayward and Marcus Cole on the Future Housing Leaders Program, and I want to expand that significantly.
Awesome.
So, So any final thoughts?
So I would say, remember the 5 steps, which is, diversity business plan, diversity ecosystem, minority spend, access to capital, and partnership. And in those initiatives, be bold, be intentional, and leverage strategic partnerships. So thank you so much, Doug. This is awesome. The work that you're doing is incredible, and just letting the voices be heard and the perspectives to be shared, I feel like we're headed in the right direction.
I do too. I feel it is the moment, and we're going to keep it going. So Tammy, really thank you very much for your time, and you're inspirational in all that you've done, and you got a long track ahead. So I wish you the best in that, and we will be talking some more. So thanks again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.